Welcome to my lesson on completing the square. Completing the square takes a quadratic equation from standard form into vertex form. The example we're going to do today is 2x squared plus 12x plus 1. The important thing you want to make sure is that when you're writing it out, you have the x squared term first, followed by the x term, followed by the constant on the end. So what we're going to do first is when you write out your equation, you identify the a value, the coefficient in front of x squared. In this case, it's a 2. We're going to common factor that out of the first two terms only. So we're going to divide 2 out of 2x squared and out of 12x. So we write it in front, open a bracket. Our first term turns into an x squared. Our second term turns into a 6x. So we divided them both by 2, leaving the 1 on the outside of the bracket. Then what we want to do is we're going to take that new second term, that new 6x, we're going to do two things to it. We're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. And this is an important step we do always when we complete the square. So we divide 6 by 2 and we get 3, and then we square 3. Don't square root it, we square 3, 3 times 3, and we get 9. So we're going to take that new number and we're going to add it and subtract it next to the 6x inside the bracket. And the reason we add it and subtract it is that way it adds up to 0, because plus 9 minus 9 equals 0. So we haven't changed the value of the equation, we've just given us some new numbers to work with to help us. So we're going to leave the x squared plus 6x plus 9 inside the bracket because we're going to use that in a minute, but the minus 9 we really didn't need except to balance out our equation. So the minus 9 is going to come outside the bracket, and it's always the number you're subtracting that we're going to take outside the bracket. So the minus 9 comes out. The rule here is that you make sure that whatever number comes outside the bracket has to get multiplied back by the a value that you common factored out. So this minus 9 is going to get multiplied again by that 2 that we factored out at the beginning, which is going to turn it into a minus 18. So that comes out. And we're going to combine that minus 18 and the plus 1 on the end because they're like terms. So they're going to go together and make a minus 17 for us. So we're almost there. Last thing we want to do is take a look at what we have left over inside the brackets, x squared plus 6x plus 9, and we're going to product sum, we're going to factor that. So you're going to notice that the two numbers we find are identical. So two numbers that add up to 6, multiply to give us 9, are 3 and 3. You notice that's also a perfect square trinomial, so we can write it as x plus 3 times x plus 3, or we can just write it as x plus 3 squared. And if we do that, then we end up with our vertex form. And the nice thing about this is that right away we can see our vertex is going to be at -3, -17. Make sure you always change the sign of the number inside the bracket, so it's -3, not +3 when we look at where it's going to be on the graph. So here's a completed version for us. I have two other examples here for you to look at. A couple spots I want you to pay attention to. My second example is what happens when your a is a negative. So make sure when you common factor out that -1 that in this case the minus 8x becomes a plus 8x. It changes the sign. And when you take the minus 16 outside the brackets, it gets multiplied by -1 again, by that a value that we talked about in the other example. So it actually becomes a plus 16. This is a good example of a parabola that will be facing downwards if you were going to graph it instead of facing upwards. The last example I have is what happens when we have a fraction involved. So that's there to help you. Make sure you pay attention to taking the 9, dividing it by 2, and then squaring it. We actually end up with 81 over 4. And when that comes outside the bracket, in this case, we have to multiply that by 3. So 81 times 3 becomes minus 243 over 4, and then we combine that with the minus 5 on the end to come up with our k value. Okay, so try your best, go over the examples, hope it helps, take your time, enjoy, and good luck.